Yo, what's up, YouTube? So I literally just recorded this video. It was 40 minutes long. And then at the end, I realized the video did not pick up any of my audio. So here I am again. At least I know what I'm going to talk about this time, though. But yeah, I'm just going to I have some notes written down here. I asked the folks over on the Dreaming Spanish Fans Discord if they had any questions for me regarding my Portuguese progress so far. So what I've done is I've compiled those questions here, and we're just going to go through them one by one. So yeah, hopefully you guys find this useful. The first question here is, why did you start learning Portuguese? So I started learning Portuguese because of three things. I had a trip to Portugal and Spain planned. I found that it was very similar to Spanish, and I have a Brazilian friend and a neighbor, so I was like, okay, why not? That's just a little bonus, I guess. So I started listening to a little bits of Portuguese, and I think the novelty of it, plus my level of or my relatively high level of understanding, like right off the bat, plus the fact that I was going to go to a Portuguese speaking place, all kind of like made me get like addicted to it. Before that, I didn't really have any intentions of learning another Romance language, like much less Portuguese. Like I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't like it at all. But I'm actually really enjoying learning the language right now. And I think it does sound cool, actually. So yeah, those are my reasons. The second question here is, how is Portuguese similar to Spanish? How much could you understand at 0 hours? So from my understanding, Portuguese and Spanish share like 90% of their vocabulary. And it seems that way to me. I might, somebody can fact check me out there, but that's what I heard. And so my understanding at 0 hours really just depended on the kind of Portuguese I was listening to. Brazilian Portuguese, the pronunciation is a lot more similar to Spanish, whereas the European variety is a little bit more similar to English in it being stress timed rather than syllable timed. And so you can kind of like lose sound, like letters here and there, basically. So there's a channel called Speaking Brazilian Language School. I could understand her videos like just fine at 0 hours. I definitely was missing some things, but I was really just shocked at how much I could understand. There's one video that I always point to people when I try and show them just like how similar Portuguese is to Spanish. It's called, or I think it's something like What Not to Do in Brazil. It's from that channel. So I would recommend checking that out if you're curious. And then as far as Portuguese goes, well, I had to start all the way at like beginner level content. I didn't have to watch very much of it, but I did have to watch beginner content. The next question here is, what made you switch from European Portuguese to Brazilian Portuguese? So should I mention this now or later? Okay, I mentioned this a little, or I have this planned a little bit later, I guess. So I initially decided to focus on European Portuguese because of my trip, right? That was like the main reason. Apart from that, I've got a Brazilian friend here where I live that is planning on moving to Portugal. So I figured, I'd be out there potentially visiting him quite frequently, and I would just be visiting Portugal a lot more than I would ever visit Brazil. But I kept running into Brazilians literally like everywhere I went. It was really funny. In Porto, I went to a language exchange, all Brazilians. 1 in 3 people in Lisbon is Brazilian. And then in Barcelona, a ton of Brazilians at my hostel there. Even my bunkmate was Brazilian. And he didn't speak Spanish or English, so we had to do crosstalk. For those of you that don't know what crosstalk is, basically I spoke Spanish, he spoke Portuguese. That way we could, both get input in the other person's language, and not have to worry about like how to speak their language, essentially. Also, I realized just how important having dubbed anime accessible is to me in this entire process. It's one of my favorite forms of media to consume, and I was really struggling to find content that I enjoyed in European Portuguese. And it's just like, not only are there just not European Portuguese dubs, or I mean, if there are, I couldn't find any for much stuff. I mean, from what I've heard, they usually just watch stuff subtitled. But there's just a lot more Brazilian Portuguese content. Like, I think Brazilians outnumber Portuguese people like 10-1, something crazy like that. And so, yeah, there's just a lot more content in Brazilian Portuguese. And I figured, the most important thing is like there's a slight chance down the line that maybe I spend an extended period of time in Portugal, but I have to think like long term, right? Like, even if I'm like, if I'm anywhere but Portugal, Brazilian Portuguese is going to be a lot better for me, because it'll be easier to find content that I enjoy and help me like interact with the language on a consistent basis. And like I said, there's so many Brazilians in Portugal that you'll be able to communicate just fine. Speaking Brazilian Portuguese, also like a lot of European Portuguese speakers grow up watching Brazilian content, so they're very familiar with the sounds of it. So there's no like struggle to understand Brazilian Portuguese speakers. Some Brazilians do tend to from my understanding, tend to struggle a little bit understanding European Portuguese at first, just because they're not exposed to it much growing up. But my Brazilian friend says that it's like trying to understand a person from rural England with a strong accent as an American English speaker. The next question here is, do you plan to travel to Portugal or Brazil? Well, I just came back from Portugal. I do definitely plan on going back to Portugal. I had a great time there, a beautiful place. I never really planned on going to Brazil before, but I've met so many Brazilian people and now that I've started learning Portuguese, I do want to go to Brazil. Hopefully maybe I can go there with my friend. Maybe I can go there with my neighbor, who is also Brazilian. I don't know, or maybe I'll just, go solo and meet up with some of the Brazilians that I met, but somehow, some way I do want to go. The next question is, how do you plan on learning Portuguese? Well, those of you that know me from the Dreaming Spanish community, the answer here is pretty obvious: comprehensible input. And for those of you that don't know what comprehensible input is, it's essentially content where you can understand, at least the gist of what's going on, even if you don't understand every single word. And then over time, your brain just kind of figures everything out. That's what I did to learn Spanish. After about, I guess with Spanish, I did do a little bit of grammar study and a little bit of vocabulary review at like the very beginning when I was taking classes in high school and college and stuff like that. But once I noticed that I was like picking up words and like grammar from videos that weren't in like my flashcards and stuff, I was like, oh, okay, this is working. I'll just do that. And that's what I did for like the next 1,000 hours of Spanish. So I'm going to do the same thing for Portuguese. I initially started with a playlist comprised of content from the channels The Sounds of Portuguese and Portuguese Comprehensible Input. Those are two European Portuguese channels that they don't have a ton of content, so I just rewatched everything like 2 to 3 times. And then I did about a dozen hours of crosstalk as well in the beginning, using the whiteboard feature on Discord. Quick little side note, I'm like talking here like a little bit quicker than I normally would because the sunlight, I'm running out of sunlight here. And I don't want to record this again. Plus I don't think you guys want to have to sit here for 40 minutes. I'll try and make this video a little bit quicker, this time around. But yeah, I was using the whiteboard feature on Discord. Pro tip for those of you that want to do crosstalk on there, but you still need like to draw pictures and stuff. Just use the GIFs feature. You can search the GIF, like for example, if you want to, this is the example I used last time because it was the only thing I could think of. If you're looking, instead of drawing a toilet, you could just type in toilet in the GIFs and put it right there on the whiteboard. And boom, you're done. And it's like going to be pretty damn clear that it's a toilet rather than whatever whatever you can draw. So yeah, I realized that after like 15 hours of input or so that I could understand like low intermediate podcasts, specifically the podcasts from Portuguese with Leo. So I started incorporating that as well. Which, you know, I was pretty damn surprised that it only took me 15 hours to get to podcast, because with Spanish it took me 150 hours. But yeah, I think my brain just needed about a dozen hours or so to like just kind of get used to the sounds of European Portuguese, and then the similarities between that and Spanish just kind of took over from there, helped me with the rest. Apparently European Portuguese, the grammar is a little bit more similar to Spanish than Brazilian Portuguese is, but I haven't really been able to tell much of a difference. Maybe it's because I don't have too much input at the moment, but yeah, it's Spanish is going to help you with both regardless. I would not even worry. Brazilian Portuguese is probably even easier to learn than European Portuguese if you know Spanish, just because it's like the way it's pronounced, right? It's pronounced a lot more like Spanish in terms of it being like syllable timed. You can hear every letter, every sound a lot more clearly. And so on the plane flight home from my trip, I forgot to download enough Spanish language content. So essentially the only thing I had to watch available was the entire first season of Demon Slayer in Brazilian Portuguese. And so I was like, all right, this is it. This is my test. I'm going to see if my brain gets fatigued listening to Brazilian Portuguese. If it doesn't, great. Also, like, how much am I going to be able to understand here, right? And I got through the entire flight and I was like pretty surprised. At that time, I had about 35 hours of input and I could follow the story like comfortably enough to enjoy it. I was definitely missing things. I currently have 60 hours. I still definitely miss things, but I can understand a good amount, like more than enough to comfortably follow the story. And it probably helps. It most definitely helps, I think, that I've seen Demon Slayer before. And so like, I basically just decided from there out that dubbed anime was going to be like my main form of content moving forward for Portuguese. And then I started mixing in more podcasts in around 50 hours. I maybe, yeah, why not? I'll put the podcasts that I'm listening to, like low intermediate beginner stuff, more so low intermediate podcasts in the description. The next question is, how accurate do you feel the recommendation to have the number of hours on the Dreaming Spanish roadmap is if you already know a Romance language? I would say it is accurate, especially if you are a Portuguese speaker learning Spanish or a Spanish speaker learning Portuguese. My Brazilian buddy started learning Spanish roughly the same time I did, and he just went straight to intermediate. So like he was at least 150 hours ahead on the roadmap. Compared to like an English speaker learning Spanish for the first time. And then as far as like my experience goes with Portuguese, I've been learning at an incredible rate. Like I'm already watching anime and enjoying it comfortably. And I think for Spanish, it took me like, anime became accessible at like 430 hours. but it didn't. I decided to wait until like 600 hours because it felt more comfortable. I can understand a lot more, and I think my level of understanding is maybe somewhere in between those 2 hour counts right now. At least that's what it feels like. It's kind of hard to remember at this point. It's been so long. I currently have over 2,000 hours of Spanish. So, what is your plan for outputting? So I'm not sure when I'm going to start outputting. I started outputting at 1,000 hours for Spanish. And I think this time around, I'm going to follow more of like a refold style approach, where I read a lot first, then write, and then I finally start speaking. With Spanish, I just started speaking right off the bat, because I didn't really read much at the time, and I couldn't be bothered to write. So I'll probably start reading somewhere between 300 and 500 hours of input. Now I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to write, mostly just because I'm kind of lazy. Like, writing requires you to find someone to review your writing, go over it like with you, potentially. And then you have to like sit there and think about what you got to do. So it takes a lot more time. Who knows with the, now that we got ChatGPT, maybe I'll just ask it for a prompt, type something out in Portuguese and have it give me feedback. Instead of like asking a native speaker to review it for me. But yeah, also I do plan on doing some dedicated pronunciation practice because there's some sounds in Portuguese that just do not come as naturally to me as the sounds in Spanish did. I'm not sure how long that's going to take me to really nail. I don't think it will take too long. But yeah, I'm probably going to have to do some of that as well. And the next question is, how much time do you devote to Spanish and Portuguese each day? Currently about 60 to 90 minutes for both languages. Sometimes I'll do like an hour of Spanish and my goal is to do at least 60 minutes of listening practice for Spanish and then about 30 minutes of reading. But if I have more time, then I'll just do more listening practice. And then with Portuguese, just 90 minutes of listening practice every day. What kind of content have you been watching to learn Portuguese? Like I mentioned earlier, at this point, it's almost exclusively dubbed anime. I do watch the occasional like learner video on YouTube, but for the most part, just anime. I've noticed that I can focus a lot better with stories, and focus is crucial for improving when you're trying to learn something, especially as we get older. That focus becomes more and more important. Like the older we get, the more we have to focus to maintain or to activate kind of that neuroplasticity and really learn something. So yeah, I'm just going to stick with anime, for the most part. I'll probably still be doing, crosstalk as well once I get back into the mood of it, or the mood for it. I haven't really just felt like doing much crosstalk lately. I feel like I actually ended up doing more crosstalk with Spanish once I got to a really high level of comprehension, because then I could just when I was done watching whatever I wanted to watch for the day, I would hop in the voice chat and just kind of hang out for fun and do crosstalk there. So I'll probably end up doing the same thing. I don't really want to have to use the whiteboard at the moment if I don't have to. So yeah, we'll kind of see how that goes. The next question here is, how are you maintaining your Spanish? Do you watch the same type of content in both languages? With Spanish, it's the same thing as what I'm doing in Portuguese, just watching anime, the occasional YouTube video, podcasts when I'm out and about doing things. I'll usually alternate between Spanish podcasts and Portuguese podcasts depending on how much focus the task at hand requires. Like if I'm driving, Spanish, just because it's easier for me to understand. Otherwise, if I'm walking my dog, Portuguese. And yeah, I don't really have a reason to watch content in one language that I don't watch in the other. It's not like I've found something specific that I haven't found an alternative to in the other language. And plus, like, I don't know. I enjoy, like I said, just watching dubbed anime and stories. So, and luckily there's dubs for both of those. And the next question is, are you studying Portuguese grammar or vocabulary? Not currently. For Spanish, I would like to study Spanish grammar in Spanish. Hopefully I can find like a video style course or something where I can just watch the videos and like lightly review everything. No flashcards, no homework, none of that. Just, watch it once to kind of familiarize myself with the different grammar points. I would like to do the same thing in Portuguese in preparation for output. And when I say output, I'm referring to like writing and speaking. I would like to do that probably when I have like 300, or when I start reading is probably like somewhere around there is when I would like to learn Portuguese grammar in Portuguese, at least just a little bit. So hopefully I can find something like that. I would much rather watch videos than read a textbook. The next question is, do you confuse words in Spanish and Portuguese? Not really. Sometimes I do if the sentences are short enough. Then sometimes they just look like Spanish sentences when they're actually Portuguese sentences, because they're the exact same. I did get this one phrase mixed up a few times because I was watching a video listening to a podcast from Portuguese with Leo. And he was talking about, in Portuguese, or a lot of Portuguese speakers say this phrase when it actually should be this phrase. And they say that phrase because of influence from Spanish. And so I remember I was speaking with my Spanish tutor and I was like, wait, which one of these is the Spanish version and which one is the Portuguese one? I couldn't remember. But apart from that, I haven't really had anything confuse me like that. The next question is, would you recommend starting to learn Portuguese when would you recommend starting to learn Portuguese? So I started learning Portuguese at 2,000 hours of Spanish. I wanted my Spanish to get really, really good. Like my end goal is to get it as good as my Spanish or as good as my English or pretty damn close. Just because it's very important to me. And so because of that, I waited so long. But I would say, like, if you're currently learning a Romance language, I would say 2,000 hours of input of listening practice is a good point to start learning another Romance language. I don't think you're really going to get the two languages mixed up at that point. I can't say how it's going to be if you start earlier because I didn't start earlier, but I think you could start easily at 1,500 hours if you're learning a non-Romance language and then you want to start learning Portuguese. Mostly because since they're not related, you're not going to have any of those mix-up issues. And then also it just kind of depends on your priorities. If you want to get to like a really high level of whatever language you're learning, spend more time learning that before you learn another language, because once you start learning a second language or another language than the one you're learning now, you're going to have a lot less time. So you're going to a lot less time available for that other language for your first, the one you were studying before. So you're not going to improve as rapidly. The next question is, have you experienced any unexpected challenges? Yes. So essentially, I was not really expecting my comprehension to vary so much depending on who and like what I'm listening to. There's a YouTube channel called Teach Yourself Portuguese. He does like comprehensible input style videos similar to Dreaming Spanish. And he has a podcast with a good amount of content. And I noticed when I listen to his podcast, I have to focus a lot harder to try and understand what he's saying compared to other Brazilian podcasts. I'm not sure why that is. I think maybe it's just his accent. No idea. Also, when I join like Hello Talk voice rooms, sometimes I can follow without any trouble exactly what they're talking about. Other times I have no idea. So it's really just dependent on the context or the topic and who's talking. But for the most part, like I mentioned earlier, I have like no trouble understanding anime. The voices are very clear. Sometimes the background noise can get in the way, like the music and all that, the sound effects, but it's not really an issue. The next question is, how will you use Portuguese in real life? I will probably not. Not unless I'm in Portugal or Brazil, mostly because like with Spanish, I have had a difficult time finding and making Spanish-speaking friends where I live. Mostly because I'm at home all the time. A lot of the stuff or my work and stuff is all like online at the moment. And then when I do meet up with my Spanish-speaking friends, we're usually hanging out with like people who only speak English. So we just speak English so we don't exclude them from the conversation. The same thing will probably happen with Portuguese, even more so since like there's not really a ton of Portuguese speakers where I'm at. At least I don't think so. But it's not really a big issue. I'm fine with just using my languages online. And then occasionally when I happen to be in a country that speaks those languages. Then the final question that we have here is, do you want to learn another language to be a polyglot? Yes. Really just for shits and giggles, so I can call myself a polyglot. The word doesn't really mean much to me. I think it's kind of been, it has like a slightly negative connotation nowadays, I think, because of all the fake YouTube polyglots. I usually prefer the word multilingual because it's more inclusive. But if I do the next language, I'm not sure which one I have or which one I would do yet. I'm currently thinking about either doing German, Japanese, or French. German, because I think it would be cool to learn another Germanic language. If you didn't know, English is a Germanic language. Japanese, mostly because I spent some time living in Japan and I did try and learn it before, but I didn't know how to learn a language at the time. So I feel like I kind of have unfinished business with Japanese. And then French, just because it's like, I feel like it'd also be relatively easy to learn thanks to at that point I would know Portuguese and Spanish. So thanks to those two languages. And then also it's just really widely spoken. And I'm sure there's a good amount of content in French as well. But it doesn't really pique my interest as much as German and Japanese do. But we'll see. I didn't expect to be learning Portuguese, so who knows what language I'll be learning next. I was thinking prior to this video, or prior to Portuguese, that the maximum number of languages I could learn, not including my native language, would be 5. But the more time I spend learning Portuguese, the more I've started to kind of realize that I would like to do other things. I spend the vast majority of my free time watching content in my target languages because I'm trying to get as much input as possible. And I think it would be nice to pick up another hobby. So, maybe next or after Portuguese, maybe I'll take a little break, learn to play the guitar or something. I don't know. Or if I do start doing a 4th one right away, I'll just take it super chill, even more chill than I'm taking it with Portuguese. But we'll see. That's pretty far down the road from now. But those are all the questions that I have here. Hopefully you guys found this video useful. Hopefully, I answered some of the questions that you guys all had for me. And with that being said, hopefully, if you are interested in following my Portuguese and my Spanish progress, because yes, I will continue uploading progress updates in Spanish, feel free to hit that subscribe button and even, that notification bell if you're feeling down for it. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.